Next, remarks by former Canadian Prime Minister Brian Mulroney. Recently, he addressed an audience at DePauw University in Greencastle, Indiana. He spoke about the North American Free Trade Agreement that his Conservative government approved. Mr. Mulroney served as Prime Minister of Canada from September of 1984 until he stepped down earlier this year. The new Prime Minister, Jean Chrétien from the Liberal Party, has said that he wants to revisit NAFTA. Mr. Mulroney's speech lasts approximately 55 minutes.
Mr. Mulroney, it's a privilege to have you at DePauw University on this day to speak on the topic Canada, America, and the future. Welcome to DePauw.
Thank you, Mr. President, and ladies and gentlemen, chers amis. I'm delighted to be here for the Ubben lecture at DePauw. I wanted to come to DePauw anyway for a long time. I told Ken Bodie years ago, I want to come to DePauw, but I want to see the place where Vernon Jordan and Dan Quayle were together. This is remarkable. In fact, someone was saying last night when I came in, one of the students, that Canada and the United States were, he thought, very similar. And I was reminded of something that happened to me in that regard. It was in August of 1987. I had been at the Venice G7 summit, and President Reagan was not feeling very well, and that was a bad summer for him. You may remember the Iran-Contragate thing in August. And I remember picking up the New York Times on a Sunday morning, and there in a big black headline it said, Reagan's popularity plummets to 59%. And right there I knew the difference between Canadians and Americans. It's language. The word plummet clearly does not mean the same thing in Canada as it does in the United States. I can remember calling up Reagan at Camp David. That day was Sunday. And I said, Ron, how are you doing? He said, awful, Brian. Did you see the New York Times? I said, Ron, I don't know how to break this to you, but on a good day, Margaret Thatcher, Helmut Kohl, and I together don't have a 59% approval rating. Well, the fundamental goal of government, any government, is to make a better world. A world that is safe from war and safe for democracy. A world that is free from deprivation and free from degradation. For 40 years, the United States and the Soviet Union were the world's two superpowers, the leaders of the West and the East, of NATO and the Warsaw Pact, the keepers, in President Kennedy's words, of a cold and a bitter peace. And then, in 1985, there came to power in the Kremlin a man named Mikhail Gorbachev, who questioned the assumptions of the Soviet system, ended the arms race and ultimately the Cold War, disbanded the East Bloc, the Warsaw Pact, and finally, and incredibly, the tyranny of the Soviet Federation itself. I remember sitting across a conference table from him in a private meeting in the Kremlin just hours after he assumed office in March of 1985. And I would never, ever have thought it possible. Flanked by Andrei Gromyko, this new leader of the Soviet Union, spoke to me with confidence about the future, but gave precious few indications of the convulsive and historic changes he was about to unleash. For Canada and the United States, the post-Cold War world offers unique opportunities and daunting challenges. We begin from a common heritage of democratic traditions and a common defense of liberty. There are reminders of that from the trenches of one war to the beaches of the next. Places inscribed in the history of valor, where Canadians and Americans have stood together, where Canadians and Americans have died together in defense of freedom. The reality is that President Clinton inherited a more different world from George Bush than the one that President Kennedy inherited from Dwight Eisenhower. Within the last few years, the Berlin Wall fell and Germany was reunited. A trade unionist from Gdansk became president of Poland. A dissident poet sat in the castle in Prague. Communist regimes tumbled like dominoes across Central and Eastern Europe. And in the Second Russian Revolution, the people of Moscow made a human wall around their parliament. And tanks that had crushed each stirring of liberty in the past, now, for the first time, dared not cross. But these astonishing events would never have occurred without America's leadership of the Western Alliance and the support of its allies, like the United Kingdom and France and Canada. In Russia last month, we witnessed the Second October Revolution, in which paradoxically President Yeltsin had to send tanks against the Stalinist parliament in order to save Russia's fledgling and fragile democracy. I know Mr. Yeltsin, and I know that he is not, as some critics suggest, a latter-day czar, but an authentic and bold figure on behalf of democratic and market reforms in Russia. It is in the enlightened self-interest of the United States, Canada, and its Western partners in the G7, who together account for nearly 2/3 of the world's entire economic output, to encourage the democratic reforms presently going on in Russia today. If we could spend trillions of dollars defeating the Soviets in the Cold War, and we did, we can continue to allocate some billions to assist in nurturing their freedom and assisting in the transition from a command to a market economy. Already they've made remarkable progress. Some 30 million people are now engaged in the private sector. And this kind of evolution is going to make of this country a reliable partner and friend for the United States and Canada and the world.